Hi, my name is Eileen.
And I'm Peyton.
And we're interns at Sports Philanthropy Network. And thank you for coming to the Adaptive Sports panel. And we're going to hand it off to Kayla to moderate.
Good morning, everybody. We're so thankful that you're here. And before we get started and I introduce our three amazing panelists who are doing great work in the space, we want to ask you to please actively participate with us. We're asking you to use the chat features to give us your comments, to ask your questions, and to make sure that we can make this as engaging and problem solving as possible. Again, my name is Kayla Bradham. I'm the Vice President of Community Development for the Sports Philanthropy Network. And I want to say thank you to all of our interns and staff who've put this together. I'm going to start with Doug Garner. Doug, if you'll take a minute to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Doug Garner. I'm the head men's wheelchair basketball coach at the University of Texas Arlington and also the adaptive sports and recreation coordinator for the university. I'm an international wheelchair basketball technical official, and I also volunteer with the Global Sports Mentoring Program, working with emerging leaders from around the world through the Center for Sport, Peace, and Society at the University of Tennessee.
Thank you, Doug. Gregory, how about you?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Gregory Charlotte. I'm a sports and human performance physician. I take care of athletes and middle-aged folks across Texas, which is how my background came out here, and California. And I love working with athletes, especially women athletes. And we just had the Women's Sports Forum, and we talked a lot about ways that we can work together to support women and disabled athletes in terms of helping them improve their game, improve mental health, and ways that we could all be supportive of each other. So I'm thrilled to be here today. I love all the work that you all are doing, and I'm happy to help however we can in advancing the cause of disabled athletes.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that. And Jonathan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Hyder. I was born a quad amputee. Growing up, I was heavily involved in adaptive sports out of the northern Chicago suburbs area. I specifically took off in the sport of swimming, taking me not only to the national stage, but to the world stage as well, lending me a spot on the resident team at the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today, I continue to advocate through my own public speaking business, Footstar Productions, helping out with different athletics and different, motivating people in the athletic field.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I think it's important that we start with sharing the story and what we're seeing. Each of you have a very niche background, each of you are working in 3 different areas. I'd like to ask you to start by just sharing the story of what you're seeing right now in adaptive sports. Doug, may we start with you, please?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of things. There's a whole confluence of things coming together. I've been in the sport since '92, and I've seen great improvements in awareness of adapted athletes and adapted sports and the value of providing programs for our students with disabilities here at the university, but all people with disabilities who are at such risk for other health issues because of lack of opportunities to participate in healthy and active activities due to maybe cost of equipment or space or just awareness that people with disabilities do want to be active and do want to participate. It kind of mirrors the Title IX movement as far as people really becoming aware that this population does want to be active and participate in sports and oftentimes use sport as the vehicle back into life or as a vehicle to personal growth and success for them.
Thank you. That's a great point. Gregory, what about you? Tell us your story and what you're seeing in the space.
Well, there's 3 main things that I'm seeing that I think are very important from a health standpoint. The first one is, and you all are noticing this, obviously you're on the front lines, is the technology itself is really switching more to a functional model in terms of helping athletes perform. And rather than having, say, a wheelchair or something with wheels that maybe is useful for some situations, but isn't very useful for a race, we now have wheelchairs that don't have wheels that allow athletes to participate in certain races and go really, really fast and have very high performance. So rather than trying to mimic how we think things should be, we're developing devices that now actually perform the way we wish them to perform, which I think is a big improvement and really heading in the right direction. And I think there's a lot of excitement about how the technology is furthering the cause of disabled athletes. The second thing that I'm seeing is, in terms of physical health, every athlete has different nutritional needs. They have different health requirements. And what we're noticing now is more of a personalization of healthcare. And we're seeing now that we're able to come up with, using technology, we're able to come up with customized meal plans, customized medical screenings, and a lot of, frankly, medical care that's based on the individual and what that particular athlete needs, both for their health and to perform better on the field. And I'm excited by that. And it really is very new. And I think there's a growing awareness that things like what we eat, for example, can affect our performance. And the third thing we're seeing, which I'm hoping we'll talk more about later, is there are a lot of new mental health challenges. The pandemic and this last year has been stressful for everybody. And I find that it's really hitting athletes hard. It's hitting athletes harder than I think a lot of other groups. And this is something that we all need to pitch in together to work with our athletes and help support them as we're emerging from the pandemic.
Doctor, those are three great points, and I'm thankful that you shared them. Jonathan, how about you? What are you seeing? Tell us the story in your space, please.
Yeah, I think kind of echoing the other two, I think awareness has become something that's so big. And with social media and the abilities to reach out to athletes, especially disabled athletes, to be able to find programs and that's near to them. There are so many newer disabled sports organizations that are continuing to expand and grow and be added to from the collegiate level. More and more colleges have started adaptive sports programs to more adaptive sports just organizations across almost every state now, which is absolutely phenomenal. Seeing that people don't have to travel too far to be able to get to do in a disabled sports organization, that they're able to be amongst their peers who are also disabled, but also be able to kind of be on the same level, the same playing field, regardless of the sport. I think is absolutely phenomenal that we've seen the transformation and just being able to, like I said, connect to that peers and have that kind of that likeness within one another, and being able to explore different sports that maybe weren't available to them in the past. That I think there's not only is there more sports programs, but there's more sports available for athletes to really find what sport kind of resonates more with them, rather than picking, okay, you only have two options, basketball or baseball. Now you have 20 options of adaptive sports now available for athletes of any age, as young, as little kids all the way up to adult level. And so they're really able to find their own niche, and they're able to expand and grow in their own way, and find that full potential and be able to be successful in the adaptive sports programs.
Yeah, I think each of you are so right. Doug, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's also great. We're seeing a lot more representation of disability in the media. There's a big movement in Hollywood for more inclusion of people with disabilities, and they're broadening those opportunities. And then by getting more inclusion in the media, we're also seeing more sponsors understanding that this is a big market that they need to be active in and they want to be active in. And we're seeing a lot more support for adaptive sport programs, and like the Sports Philanthropy Network, more awareness and creating more awareness of this market.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I would liken sponsorship for sports for disabilities kind of in the same way as I would see it as an issue for getting women's sponsorships. Like the NFL has no problem getting sponsorships. the women's tackle football league definitely has more problems. Are you guys seeing good sponsors in your space? Anybody that we should be shouting out?
Toyota is a fantastic sponsor of adaptive sports. They see the wheelchair as mobility, and they are a mobility company. And they are incredible sponsors of a lot of adaptive sports, including wheelchair basketball at the high performance level for our national teams, but also building more infrastructure at the grassroots level as well.
Oh, and then if I can chime in here, I think also there's been a lot of great sponsors, leading up to the Olympic and Paralympic Games that have really engaged within the athletes beyond just the sponsorship level. BMW has now started creating and designing wheelchair racing chairs. That's something like you never thought was even possible. And here they are not only sponsoring these athletes, but then they're also engaging through creation of these, wheelchair racing chairs, which is absolutely phenomenal for a sponsor to go to that extent.
Yeah, they're supporting with R&D dollars to support excellence, support high performance improvement, and more inclusion.
Great points. I think, something that's so interesting about that gentleman is I'm 48 years old. And when I was a kid in school, we were taught, by faculty, when you see somebody with a disability, don't stare, be nice. Like we actually had this coaching and this training in school on how to be nice. And I think times have changed so much now, where with younger students, it's not a big deal. It's the same as, identifying, as gay or LGBTQA+, that is just not a big deal. So I think times have changed so much, thank goodness. And that's one of the good things that I see. But let's talk about the problems that you, the professionals, are seeing. What problems are you seeing on your end? I think, Jonathan, if you don't mind here, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I still think that there's still a setback of trying to feel, like I said, that it's okay to kind of experiment with this. I think there's so many times where there's still the intimidation factor. Like, yes, it's great that we see some of these big name, Paralympic and Olympic athletes going out there, and like that it's okay that you don't have to be say the next Tatiana McFadden, that it's okay to experiment with different sports. And I think there's a lot of still discouragement with adaptive sports that you don't have to go to the professional level, that it's just simply wonderful for you to be active as an athlete, and to be out there with peers and just be part of the adaptive sports world. And I think there's still some discouragement to try to well, if you're not the best, then why are you here kind of situation. And I think I want people to at least acknowledge that it's okay just to do it at your local level and feel encouraged to try sports and not feel like you have to, be specific to one sport and feel like, well, you only have to do wheelchair basketball, you only have to do swimming, that you can, have that versatility. And I think so many athletes get discouraged with that and feeling very they have to be in one box.
That's great. And I want to say thank you for pointing that out. Doctor, what about you? What problems are you seeing in the space? I know you alluded to mental health earlier.
Right. Well, the two biggest problems that I've been seeing are mental health, like you mentioned. And this is true, obviously, really for everybody, but I think it's especially true for athletes and very often for disabled athletes, which is there's this explosion of depression and anxiety. And we've been seeing a huge increase in the need for anti-anxiety pills, antidepressant pills. People are very unsure of where things are going. And, I think the pandemic, it's hit everybody hard, but what I found is, I think in many ways it's hit athletes even harder than the rest of us. And the reason for that is many athletes, they're used to being part of a support system. They're used to being part of a team. They have coaches. They have their teammates, they have their fans, and they have their purpose, which is to participate in their sport. And when the pandemic struck, a lot of that was set back. People were separated from their emotional supporters. They were separated from their teams. They were separated from the access to assistive devices in the case of many disabled athletes. And so a lot of the structure that people depended on emotionally and mentally was torn away, and in a way that nobody anticipated. You know, no one in 2019, no one would have seen this coming. And so it's been very difficult. And then people were stuck at home. There's a lot of anxiety about the future, and then you add financial anxieties to it, and it's really caused an explosion of depression and anxiety. So that's one thing I've seen. The other thing that I've noticed, and I'm sure that you all have noticed this as well, is I don't think that there are enough people, say physical therapists, for example, psychologists, other healthcare professionals that work with disabled athletes. I think disabled athletes really benefit from having, say, a physical therapist who's well-versed in body mechanics and how to use assistive devices. And there simply aren't enough of them. And that's something I wish we could improve on. And I hope that that's something that will come out of these conversations, is the need to expand the number of these types of specialists.
Great points. Thank you. Doug, what about you? What problems are you seeing?
Yeah, I think as we're making the evolution beyond the medical model of seeing disability into the performance model of seeing disability, the availability and the intersection of subject matter experts into training our adapted athletes. I think at the college level, we've had this program at UTA for 46 years, and in February, we were able to get our first athletic trainer for our adapted athletes, which is a huge step and much appreciated. But the subject matter experts, like the mental skills training, the strength and conditioning coaches, even the academic support of our collegiate programs, which is where a lot of our Paralympic athletes are coming from. So the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee looked at how many of our able-bodied athletes at the Olympics were being trained in collegiate programs with access to subject matter experts, and it was close to 90%. Whereas when they looked at our Paralympic athletes, it was down in the 40% range, and most of those were wheelchair basketball players who had come through collegiate wheelchair basketball programs. So we have to get beyond, okay, well, we have a club sport now for our students with disabilities, more into seeing adapted sports as truly intercollegiate sports and having access to prepare and train our athletes to meet their own potential.
Doug, thank you. Those are really great points. I guess I want to ask you if you're seeing any problems with, and this is for all three of you, either sports access, where there just really aren't facilities or locations that are geared to help, or issues in the DEI space for Paralympic athletes. Are any of you able to speak to those issues?
At our level, it is a DEI question because the schools don't understand treatment of athletes with disabilities at the same level of our able-bodied athletes. And they think they can solve issues in diversity and inclusion by allowing sport clubs, but not elevating those sport clubs and those athletes to the same level, which would, of course, take an increase in funding. And we have a few programs that are fairly well funded, none at the same level as an able-bodied program. But then we also have the programs that come in as sport clubs with no funding, and they're trying to help their athletes compete against athletes who have full scholarships and access to athletic trainers.
Yeah, and to kind of echo his point, I think this the concept of funding has been a huge kind of hurdle in this, almost like you said, the DE&I side of things. He speaks from the college side, but I think it goes so much farther beyond that I think, having facilities available that getting just even the simple modifications to make local facilities accessible enough and have the resources to have the training gyms, and kind of put them again on that equal pedestal where, like you said, you have all these organizations, even just like, your local, whatever intercollegiate teams or whatever that have the funding, but there's not the funding on the adaptive sports side of things, to be able to provide the training staff for them, to provide the venues for them, to provide the resources to help like send a team to a competition, even if it's, just like a regional, basketball tournament or a regional track tournament. I think the funds part is a huge part that I think so many athletes are missing out on that aspect, that they could become really great and have the opportunity to, make a collegiate team or make a Paralympic team, or, simply just make a difference. And there isn't funding available where they are, to be able to utilize their abilities as, a disabled athlete to, again, reach their full potential.
I mean, the truth is, adaptive sports need funding. They need money, and then it costs money. There's extra costs involved that we just need to accept, and we need to find a way to pay for it. For example, I was talking to someone the other day. A lot of people don't think about this. And for those who are watching this who don't necessarily know someone in adaptive sports, if you want to go out and you want to play basketball, you could just go to the corner. There's almost certainly a basketball court a block or two away from your house. You just go, you grab a basketball and you shoot hoops, and that's it. You don't think anything of it. If you're a disabled athlete and you want to do the same, number one, you probably need some money for your device, whatever device you might require. Number two, you might need to go to a specialized court that has wider access, that doesn't have stairs, whatever the needs may specifically be. And number three, you probably want to go to a place where there are other disabled people. And so even if you had the device, you still probably wouldn't be able to play if you went a couple blocks away from your house. You may have to go to another city or across the state to play. So there's a lot of challenges that disabled athletes face that other folks simply don't even think about. And unless we address these head on, it's going to be a real struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think part of that with community programs in schools, and even if you look at our schools at the developmental levels in physical education, it's very, very little effort going on to grow the introduction of adapted sports at the elementary and the junior high level. At the collegiate level and beyond, we may see programs like token programs for inclusion, but it's almost always separate and unequal. Yes, we have a program, but it isn't treated, accepted, funded at the same level as the other programs on the other side of the athletics formula.
And I think that education is growing, but I think definitely that's something I was going to touch on. Well, was starting that education a little bit earlier. I think it's one of those things where, disabled people are finding out about adaptive sports programs much later in life. You see people who are able-bodied who get into, sports themselves at 3-4 years old. And you see on the disabled side, I wasn't made aware of, the disabled sports organizations in my area, until I was, 8 years old, and so it's kind of like you have almost like that late blooming into athletics kind of experience. And so providing that, whether that is, as Doug said, in the physical education side of things, whether that's community outreach, whether that's doing stuff like this through, the Sports Philanthropy Network to address and educate younger populations as well as the parents, that there are the adaptive sports programs available near them, and that they're, that they can start young and that they're able to be like their peers and, be incredible athletes in elementary school if they want to be.
Great questions, guys. I have to ask, in light of all of the media attention that the NCAA garnered this past spring between men's and women's sports. Does that same problem exist in adaptive sports, or is it more equal?
Well, I could speak on the women's sports side because I've worked with a lot of women athletes on this, and this problem for women athletes has been going on really under the radar in a way forever. And I think we all owe a debt of gratitude for the fact that the spotlight's started to shine now on women's sports and their need, their right to have better facilities, better support, and I think things are starting to change in women's sports, and I think we should be thankful about that. And certainly on mental health, even, we have people like Naomi Osaka who have shown a spotlight on the importance of mental health for athletes, which we should also all be very thankful for. And I think that we're starting to see this with disabled athletes, but obviously most people get pulled in by stories. And you've mentioned this yourself, and Naomi Osaka was a great story, and it captured people's attention. And the NCAA with the basketball situation in the weight room was a great story that captured people's attention. And I think what we need to do is we need to be able to craft a story that can engage the broader public in the needs and the value of disabled athletes. And truthfully, there are so many compelling stories out there. If we could just go and spread the message, I think these types of things would really resonate with the public and could really do a lot of good.
Yeah, I think a couple things. For us to have more representation in adapted sports in places where it counts, we need to really focus on professional development and developing our athletes so that they can go out there and run programs. And developing that next generation of leaders in the adapted sports world who understand it both from the lived experience, but also from education. And I think one of the greatest things that our collegiate programs can do is to help grow those leaders by providing those opportunities for them to be able to represent themselves and their sports and the adapted sports world in areas that can help to affect change.
Yeah, I think like in that professional development, I think is huge. And that's kind of what I was going to reiterate on, is just like making sure you look from the able-bodied side, where you see a lot of these colleges and places where they have sports is they're already ready for the next generation. They've already started combing through middle school students at this point, and so I think we're kind of at this point where, like, I'm glad that, there are like the NCAA programs for various disabled sports. But I think that, again, continuing to bring up and start that next generation and allow for, that transformation of the sport, gain more colleges that have disabled sports. There aren't that many, as many people would be surprised. And allowing them to continue to grow and have more competition. I think that's one thing that is missing. If you're talking, the able-bodied side versus a disabled side, is there aren't that many competitions. There are only X amount of schools, that have disabled sports, or there are only X amount of adaptive sports organizations across the company that compete at like junior nationals or nationals. And so creating more teams and creating more environments so that there is more competition and there is further outreach to create, like I said, a bigger kind of farm group of athletes that will come through later on.
Jonathan makes a great point. As far as numbers, I can tell you in the collegiate wheelchair basketball world, we have 12 men's team at different levels of participation, from club sport and intramural to funded programs, 12 men's teams and 6 women's teams in the whole country. We're hosting collegiate wheelchair basketball nationals in March, and those are the numbers we're looking at, planning on for our structure and our schedule. So outside of that, you have a few athletes. We had a phone call the other night and there were about 30 programs that identified as working with Paralympic athletes, 30 different schools that identified as working with Paralympic level athletes. So, and our numbers of 12 men's and 6 women's teams, all 6 of the women's teams were at schools that had men's teams. So 12 schools overall that were supporting wheelchair basketball.
That's a really disappointing number. Just gonna say that's really disappointing. And to hear that half of those schools out of the 12 have women's programs, that's even more disappointing. So, I mean, we've clearly discussed some big problems, and I don't want to leave it at that, because otherwise I'm just going to go and eat ice cream all day and be taking this conference eating ice cream out of hopelessness. So let's talk about the solutions. And as we do that, I want to cover all of the things that we've just talked about with the problems, but I want to bring in one more problem, and that's from the media, right? So everybody has their eyes on Tokyo right now, but I'm not sure that most American households can tell you what sports are in the Paralympic Games, or where they're being held, or how often they occur, or who the athletes are, or anything else. How do we create more attention as we're gearing up for Tokyo? How do we kind of get that same attention for the Paralympic Games?
Well, I could use the women's athlete example again, because some women athletes have really done a tremendous job. I think that there's a lot more attention now to women's athletics than ever. And part of that is because we're learning about their personal stories. We're not just seeing their success on the field, but we're learning about their lives off the field. We're learning about their struggles and their triumphs. We're learning about maybe they're a single mom, or maybe they've had to overcome some adversity. And a lot of women have really led the way in being open about their personal lives. And I think what that's done is it's generated a lot of interest. People care about these backstories, and they love hearing about these backstories, and it makes them interested in the athlete and in the sport. And so I think that same model is the type of thing that we need to be doing here. And there's so many great things to tell, and there's so many great athletes to share, and they have such incredible stories of overcoming adversity and triumph, that if we could just communicate these backstories better, I think it would really captivate the public's attention.
I think that's a great point. Jonathan, if you don't mind, I actually want to use you as an example of what Dr. Charlap was saying, because I know that when you and I connected, and I read your bio on LinkedIn about, being an infant and being found in Croatia, I actually, pulled over my 7-year-old son, and we talked about your story. If you don't mind, just sharing a little bit about your story, I think it really expresses exactly what Doctor is saying as far as telling an engaging story.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's the story. And there are so many great, Paralympic level athletes who have been in that situation. So, a little bit about my backstory is I was born a quad amputee, and no one knows why my disability happened. And so I was given up from birth during the Croatian Civil War during the early 1990s. And I, so happened to be found by a nun who was on a mission to the whole kind of Yugoslavian area to help refugee children. And she came across me and was aware of my future adoptive family and said, "Hey, I have a kid here, a little boy with no arms and no legs. Are you interested?" And sight unseen, they said yes, and opened their arms and opened their hearts. And I was able to come to the United States because of that, and get out of a rough situation and become to a place where I was able to reach my potential. And, being a high energy kid, I, needed an outlet, and all my older siblings, they were all involved in athletics themselves. They were all able-bodied, but I was able to kind of use them as inspiration as well as my energy to find that next niche for myself with sports. And, traveling from Green Bay, Wisconsin, all the way down to, the Gurnee, Illinois area 3.5 hours each way every single Saturday, joining and starting with swimming at 7 a.m. and ending the day, with wheelchair basketball from 6 to 8 p.m. I did every other sport in between. We did wheelchair baseball, we did wheelchair tennis, and we did all these different sports throughout the day. And like that allowed me to connect with my peers. It allowed me to connect with other disabled athletes. It allowed me to find the sport that connected to me most and be able to try these different sports and be part of an organization and be part of a team that allowed me to express myself and feel like, that my disabilities just didn't exist. And so using my story and using other people's stories, I think, as, Dr. Charcoal said, is just being able to, again, that outreach and connect to other people and say, this is my story. You should check out these people's story. And by the way, their story is going to be up at the Paralympic Games in Tokyo in 2 months from now, and I think that's such a huge way to reach a further outreach.
Thank you so much for that. And Doug, you have a different perspective because you're able to speak as the parent. Would you please share with our audience your story?
Sure. We were in Arkansas, and our son was born in 1986 with spina bifida. We ran a youth sports program, a youth sports training facility. We coached gymnastics and cheerleading and swimming. And as parents of a young person with a disability, you're worried about, are they going to have friends? Are there medical issues? How are those going to play out? And until they had a little race downtown, and we asked Tyler, we asked his brother, do you want to do the little race downtown? Not even thinking about sports. And we were in that world, and it was like, sure. And so that began his transition, and he got into swimming. He got into wheelchair basketball. He started doing the Iron Kids Bread triathlons, and Iron Kids Bread was great about once we got past the local level of the nose, and that's a lot of the disability world is getting past the nose. They saw that it was great for inclusion. It was great for athletes to see him as an athlete. It was great for him. And he kind of grew up in the world of sports. He got his bachelor's degree here at UTA in wheelchair basketball. He got his master's here and his PhD, and is on the faculty here at UTA. So just everything about his story is so typical that of the athletes that I hear in coaching and in working with so many other athletes, but it actually changed his life. He'll tell you it made his life by being able to participate in sports. So that's why I feel like these collegiate programs that can offer scholarships are so important in helping create that next generation, and also the opportunity. One of my athletes is at University of Texas working on his PhD in a full scholarship. We have another one at University of Kansas about to finish his PhD. So they'll tell you, if it weren't for adapted sports in our program, they wouldn't be where they are today. So that's why it's important to be part of that story so that people really understand.
And speaking of that and talking about where people are today, Jonathan, you're a really great example as an architect in designing space. Tell us a little bit about, how your experience actually gave you an opportunity to realize that there were problems in architecture.
Yeah. So, following kind of retirement from athletics, as I went into and got my degrees in architecture and a minor and certificate in real estate development. And so I have really gotten the background in the ADA Act of 1990, the BOMA, North American Building Code, and have really, in the architecture firms that I have worked at thus far, taken, like ANSI 117 and drilled it into the heads of the staff at this place and looked at their floor plans, code scrubbed their plans and said, here's a better way to make this more inclusive and accessible from a disabled standpoint, on how we can take the space that you've already created, keep it as it is, but simply making modifications as to changing the direction the door swings, or making this hallway 6 inches wider, or changing the angle or the location of something as stupid as simple as creating a niche to put the garbage can so it's not blocking the buttons for the elevator, or any like tiny little things like that that allow for a more inclusive environment from an accessible side. and then, making the most of it.
Well, I certainly applaud all three of you for the work you're doing. And we've spent a good amount of time talking about the story. We've talked about the problems. I don't think we can leave it there. You guys are the experts. We need to talk about what you see as the solutions. Doctor, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you.
Well, the two things that I'm most excited about as solutions are the technology itself. Like we were talking about before, and I actually just watched a TEDx talk on this recently. I think it was from Arlington, actually. It might be from your own backyard. And the speaker was discussing how the model for assistive technology has changed. Originally, it was stuff that was really almost totally useless, but it was designed to kind of look like what other people, like what able-bodied peoples look like. So it would have these arms or legs or something that you could hardly use, but they were modeled to look like, any other arm or leg, but they weren't very valuable. And then they switched to a somewhat more useful model, but still not as useful as it seems. For example, if you look at crutches, if you see someone who's disabled and they're using crutches and they're standing up in the crutches, you think, oh, that's great. They're standing up and they're moving around. And from the perspective of an able-bodied person, they almost look like they're able-bodied like you. But the thing is, when you're on these crutches, a lot of times, a lot of these folks, they can only use their hands to a limited extent. It's hard to carry things. It's hard to go great distances. There's a lot of functional limitations from being dependent on crutches. So then there's newer generations of technology now that allow people to have tremendous functional power, tremendous functional advantage. And so I'm excited by the fact that there's a movement away from maybe just pure appearances and more towards functional benefit for athletes and just disabled people in general. And, we talked before about wheelchairs without wheels that are great for certain races, for example. And so I love the fact that there's this movement towards how can we make technology that actually improves people's lives. And there's a lot of people working on this. There's a lot of energy for it, and there's huge benefit from it. So that's one thing I like. On the mental health side, what I've seen that I like now, which is very exciting for me, and I think this is great for disabled athletes, and truthfully, I think it's great for everybody, is the rise of telemedicine, teletherapy. And one thing that we're seeing now, which is awesome, and this is maybe one side benefit of the pandemic, is that we're now realizing that people can speak to their doctor, speak to their psychologist from the comfort of their home. And so this makes everybody's lives easier because you don't have to drive or travel. It makes it easier, I think, especially for, say, disabled athletes or disabled folks in general, because it's more convenient to do things from home without having to navigate getting to some faraway place. And sometimes there may be a specialist who lives on the other side of the state. And now with the power of technology, with the power of your phones and with the power of Zoom and other things, you're able to work with that specialist who lives all the way across the state and get the benefit of their expertise from your home. And I just think that that's unlocking this tremendous ability of matching people together who could help each other out. And I love that. And I just think there's so much incredible potential with that.
Yeah.
Great point.
First, Jonathan, and hats off to Jonathan. He makes his success. It's so awesome knowing that his pathway wasn't as easy as it sounds. He probably has 1,000 no stories as to how he got where he is. And that's one thing that's so amazing. But to address your question, the solutions, we just need more collaborations. We're collaborating with businesses now. We're collaborating with technology now, engineering departments, sports site departments. What are some organizations at the national and international level that we can collaborate with so that our path doesn't just parallel the growth of those, but it becomes part of the growth of inclusion in the whole country. And I told you the number at the college level, at the junior level, and I was commissioner for the National Wheelchair Basketball Association Junior Division for 14 years. There are less than 100 junior wheelchair basketball teams in the United States. And that includes 3 different divisions. So it kind of tells you our numbers. But where we're seeing growth is rehab departments and city services, and the medical professional side are partnering and seeing the value of collaborating with professional organizations to grow this field. There are several rehab hospitals out there that are sponsoring adapted sports teams and adapted sports programs, and community-wide programs to teach the professionals, the therapists and the OTs and the PTs what they can do to help create more awareness for their clients as well, and the value of them being active in this field. So I think working in collaborations, and we do a lot of internships with the engineering department and education department, so that this next generation of students coming out can really see the lived experiences and bring that out into a bigger world.
Yeah, and so I think going off of that is, I think right now I'm so excited. We're in this very fun age of diversity and inclusion right now. It's a very hot topic. And because of that, going back to kind of what Doug just said, is there's just a lot of collaboration because of that right now. A lot of people are like, okay, we're all about this. Let's find ways to, include and innovate techniques and strategies to provide for more of a inclusive environment. And whether that's through technology, whether that's through mental health and medical backgrounds, whether that's just simply through education, I think we're such at a fun age of time right now where we're finding strategies to be diverse but also inclusive in our backgrounds and who we are as a community, and how we can connect to one another and collaborate in such a really happy kind of environment.
Thank you. That's a great point. And speaking of collaboration, I think it's really important that we show the listeners and let them know how they can collaborate with each of you on a professional level. So if you don't mind, Doug, I'm just going to ask you, if people want to follow you or connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
Well, our website is www.uta.edu/movinmavs, MOVINMAVS. I welcome any emails. I work with people around the country who call me, email me, and around the world. My email is dgarner@uta.edu. And I think that's the best way is to follow our program and our success, and to get in touch with me to see how you can get involved in growing this army of people who are interested in helping provide these opportunities.
And just to verify, I believe I heard you say dgarner@uta.edu. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Doctor, what about you? How can people collaborate with you?
Well, I love chatting with people. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you could look for me there, Gregory Charlop, and Charlop is spelled CHARLOP. So look for me on LinkedIn. I also have a website, GregoryCharlopMD.com. And my company, Retired Athlete Health, you can find me through there, retiredathletehealth.com. And I'd love to hear from you. And I'll tell you, and this is actually kind of one of the first public announcements about this, we're working on a TV show that discusses women and disabled athletes and how we could pool together to help empower everybody and sort of level the playing field and make things better for women and disabled athletes. And so I'm excited to be here to talk about this because, as I say, I think there's a lot of growing attention for it, and I'm proud of the work that everybody here is doing on this.
I think we're all applauding you. Thank you. Jonathan, what about you? How can people collaborate with you?
Yeah, my website is just split-star.com. All my contact information is there. links to my email, my phone number, my social medias, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, it's all on there. So follow me anywhere through my website. Again, that's split-star.com.
Thank you so much. And we are just about out of time. I think I have about 3 minutes max for each of you, maybe a little bit closer to 2, to share with our audience in 2 minutes or less what it is that they need to know about adaptive sports. And I'll let the quickest thinker amongst the group go first. Who's ready to spout off and share?
Sure, I'll go. I think the best way is to honestly just Google it. There are so many great social media strategies that exist now that simply you can find wonderful organizations at every single level. Whether you're got a small child or whether you're an adult, there's adaptive sports programs nationwide. Not only, like I said, just casually, there's also competitively, collegiately, Paralympic wise. There's on every single level in every single area. Just go out there, search it, find it. It exists. There's a lot of great resources available.
Thank
I would
you.
say, a lot of people unfortunately look at disabled people maybe with pity, and I think that that's a mistake. I think that what we need to do as society is we need to appreciate the triumphs that so many disabled people have, all the things that they've achieved and how much they've overcome. And frankly, I think we need to celebrate the successes of the disabled athletes and disabled people around us. And rather than look at things through the lens of how can we pigeonhole disabled people to be more like able-bodied people, we should think, how can we encourage their strengths and help them be even more successful? And so I think, frankly, it involves looking at things from a completely different perspective than we often do.
Thank you, Doug.
I think people can reach out and become an advocate in this world, find programs that are there or find programs that aren't there and create those collaborations that can help build those programs, because every program that's out there for young people with disabilities, there can be an equal program for the young kids with disabilities, or an equal collaboration so that there can be more inclusion and more awareness, because a lot of times it's just that people don't think about it. People haven't thought about it. My first introduction with the Sports Philanthropy Network was with the first Congress, and I was sitting there listening to all the great speakers, and I was like, man, what am I doing here? But I did go up to the microphone and I said, as you think about all these amazing programs, think about how disability can be included into these programs. And now we see so many great things happening. So change is coming. It's slow, but change is coming in. And the other speakers have really made that point.
Thank you so much. Any parting words that either of the three of you would like to share with our audience before we bring Peyton and Eileen back on?
Reach out. We all need help.
Yes, and actually, Doug, that's a great point. We all need help. Do you need more financial help? Do you need more volunteers? What is the greatest need for help that you have in your organizations?
I think because right now we have wheelchair basketball and we have some walk-on opportunities for track and field athletes, but like Jonathan is saying, not everybody wants to or can play wheelchair basketball. So how can we grow our adaptive sports program to meet the needs of more people? So yeah, financially is always great. And then as community collaborators are always great.
And I would say if you're in the technology field or the engineering field, I would reach out to folks like these panelists here today and find out, well, how can you participate and bring a fresh perspective to help improve the situation? Maybe with new technology, new devices, new designs, new websites. There's a lot of ways that the Silicon Valley crowd, for example, can pitch in and make life better. But you have to think about the problem. If you don't think about the problem, you're not going to do anything about it.
Creating awareness. Jonathan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just like, again, echoing on them, reach out to, any of us, we'll be able to connect you to the right people. Reach out to any other organizations. There's a lot of, great organizations that exist. Challenge Athletes Foundation. There's Wheelchair and Ambulance Sports USA that exists. There's, any of the local chapters of, Great Lakes Adaptive Sports or DASA or any of these other, in every single state, there's some form of disabled sports organization. Reach out to them, see how you can help them. There's one in, like I said, almost every state. See what they need, and don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no such thing as stupid questions. They'll be able to help you get to where you need to go.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to bring on the interns that we have in the green room to thank our guests and to close us out. Do we have any interns that are available?
And Kayla, thank you to you and to the network and to Roy for really jumping in with both feet and helping to create awareness.
Thank you. It's our honor, and really it is a privilege to work with so many amazing people. Kate and Eileen, we'll ask you guys to close us out.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to Doug, Gregory, and Jonathan, and thank you, Kayla, for moderating and everyone who came. I definitely learned a lot, and I think everyone did. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.